My name is Anna. I'm 27 years old. And before you judge me for staying, hear me out. I know what you're thinking. How could someone as smart as me, as strong as me, stay in a relationship like that? How could I let someone treat me like that? I used to ask myself the same thing. You see, when I met Alex, everything felt like a dream. He was charming, attentive, always there when I needed him. In the beginning, it felt like I'd found my soulmate, the one who understood me, who made me feel special. I thought I was lucky. I thought I was loved. And for a while, I didn't notice the cracks. I didn't see the manipulation, the subtle ways he began controlling me. I didn't know that the person I thought was my rock would soon become my prison. It started small, you know? The lies, the little things that didn't add up. But over time, the cracks deepened, and I began to doubt myself. I couldn't even recognize who I was anymore. I felt like I was losing everything I ever believed in. My friends, my confidence, my sense of self. The scariest part, I didn't know how to leave. How do you walk away from someone who makes you feel like you can't survive without them? I stayed, because love, to me, was supposed to hurt sometimes, right? But the truth is, it shouldn't. If you've ever loved someone who made you question your worth, stay till the end. You're not alone, and you don't have to stay trapped anymore. At first, everything felt perfect. Alex seemed to be the kind of person who had everything figured out. He knew exactly what to say to make me feel like I was the most important person in the room. His attention to detail was something I had never experienced before. He remembered the little things, like how I took my coffee, or the way I liked my pillows fluffed just so. He made me feel seen, understood, and cherished. In a way, I thought it was love. The kind of love everyone dreams about. But somewhere in the midst of all that sweetness, something didn't feel right. At first, I brushed it off as nothing. You know, those little signs that nag at the back of your mind, but you choose to ignore. Because you don't want to question the fairy tale you've been swept into. There were these small, almost imperceptible moments that I couldn't quite shake off. One evening, we were having dinner at a friend's house, and Alex made a joke about my clumsiness, something I'd heard him say before. It wasn't anything malicious, but I could sense something in the way he said it. There was a subtle edge in his tone that made me uneasy, but everyone laughed, so I laughed along too. I told myself I was being sensitive. He didn't mean anything by it, right? But it didn't end there. Over time, these little jabs started to appear more frequently. He would laugh at my mistakes, my quirks, and tell me I was being overdramatic whenever I reacted to something he said or did. He would mock my ideas or opinions, calling them ridiculous in front of my friends. The thing is, it wasn't obvious at first. It wasn't some screaming insult or a dramatic outburst. It was small, subtle, so subtle that I began to question if maybe I was the one overreacting. When I expressed my discomfort, he'd brush it off, saying things like, "Oh, come on, you know I'm just joking," or "You're too sensitive." He'd even tell me that I was too serious, and that I needed to relax. And somehow, I believed him. I thought, maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was just overthinking it. After all, who am I to complain when everything else seemed so perfect? But slowly the constant jokes started to chip away at my confidence. The things that once made me proud of myself, my creativity, my intelligence, my ability to make others laugh, began to feel like flaws. I started second-guessing myself, wondering if I really was too clumsy, too dramatic, too serious. The worst part was, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was losing control over my own thoughts and emotions. I couldn't even trust my own instincts anymore. There were moments where I thought I was seeing a side of Alex that didn't match the charming man I fell for. But each time I tried to speak up about it, I'd be dismissed with a smile and a soft, "You're overthinking it." I'd let it slide, thinking that I was just being paranoid or irrational. That was his favorite thing to say to me. "You're just paranoid." At first, I didn't even notice how often he said it. But soon, I couldn't escape it. It wasn't just his words that started to confuse me. It was the way he acted. He'd tell me I didn't need to worry about certain things. But then I'd find out later that he was keeping things from me. He'd reassure me that I had nothing to be concerned about, only for me to discover that he'd been hiding things. Little lies here and there that didn't seem like much at first. But eventually, those small lies started to add up. He'd tell me he'd be out with his friends, but he'd come back hours later than he promised, always with a reason that didn't quite add up. "We just lost track of time," he'd say. Or, "You know how long it takes to get out of the city." But when I'd ask for more details or if I could come along next time, he'd brush it off with a comment about how I'd never understand his need to unwind. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, trying to balance between being understanding and not overreacting. Every time I brought something up, he'd make me feel like I was asking for too much. "You're being too clingy," he'd say. Or, Why can't you just trust me? So I started to pull back. I stopped asking questions. I began to accept the excuses and tell myself that maybe I was being unreasonable. It wasn't as if he'd ever done anything overtly wrong. There were no red flags waving in my face. But something inside me felt off. I started feeling like I was the one at fault for questioning his actions. The more I questioned him, the more I began to question myself. That was the first step in my isolation. I pulled away from my friends. I didn't want them to see me as the paranoid girlfriend who didn't trust her partner. I didn't want to admit that I felt uneasy around him sometimes, so I started to hide it. But hiding it from others didn't make it go away. Instead, I began to feel like I was losing touch with the person I used to be. Confident, strong, independent. The small lies, the gaslighting, the constant feeling of doubt. They were all there, slowly building up. And I couldn't see it. Not yet. Looking back now, I realize how insidious it all was. How the manipulation was hidden in plain sight, disguised as love and concern. And the most terrifying part is, I let it happen. As the days passed, the small, subtle signs of manipulation began to grow more evident. At first, I thought it was just part of every relationship. The little compromises you make to keep the peace. The things you let slide because, deep down, you believe they don't matter that much. But those little things started to eat away at me. I found myself justifying them more and more, convincing myself that everything was okay, that I was just being overdramatic. But deep down, I felt a change. Like I was slowly being pulled into something darker. Something I didn't fully understand. I had always been a social person. I loved spending time with my friends, going out for coffee, laughing over inside jokes, making memories. But after a while, I began to notice something strange. Alex didn't seem to like it when I spent too much time with my friends. At first, it wasn't anything overt. It was little comments here and there, always dressed up as concern. "Do you really need to go out tonight? I was looking forward to spending time with you," he'd say when I had plans with my friends. "It's been a while since we had a quiet night in," he'd add, in that gentle tone that made me feel like I was letting him down by wanting to do something as simple as see my friends. And of course I didn't want to disappoint him. So I started canceling plans. One by one, I started prioritizing Alex's needs over my own. But it didn't stop there. Eventually, it wasn't just him asking me to stay in. He started questioning my friendships, subtly at first. "Are you sure you trust them?" he'd ask. "They don't seem to care about you as much as I do." Every time I tried to defend my friends, he'd turn it around. "I'm just worried about you. They don't understand you the way I do. I just want what's best for you." His words were laced with concern, but in reality, they were thinly veiled manipulation. I started to feel like I couldn't trust anyone outside of him. He became my world, the center of everything. My friends didn't matter anymore. I didn't see it happening at first. I didn't see how isolated I was becoming. It wasn't until one of my friends, Sophie, pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "Jess, we miss you. What happened to the old you? You barely answer our texts anymore. We get that you're in a relationship, but this isn't like you." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. The old me. The me who would never let a relationship take over her life like this. Sophie was right. I had stopped being myself. I didn't recognize the person I was becoming. But when I tried to talk to Alex about it, he would reassure me that everything was fine. "It's just that I love spending time with you, Jess. I don't want to share you with anyone else," he'd say. There it was again. The manipulation hidden behind the guise of love. At the time, I couldn't see it for what it was. I just thought I was lucky to have someone who wanted to spend so much time with me. But now, I see that his attempts to pull me away from my friends were calculated. He was isolating me. One step at a time, he was cutting me off from the people who had always supported me. I stopped going out. I stopped making plans with anyone except Alex. I convinced myself that it was just the natural course of a relationship, that spending time alone together was a sign of intimacy, of closeness. But it wasn't just about the time we spent together. It was about control. He wanted me all to himself, and without realizing it, I was giving him exactly what he wanted. The worst part? I stopped even noticing how much I was changing. The things that used to matter to me, my passions, my goals, my friendships, They started to fade into the background. I stopped pursuing things that made me happy, things that had nothing to do with Alex. I let my dreams slip away, thinking that as long as I made him happy, everything would be fine. But as I pulled away from my friends and became more dependent on Alex, something inside me began to wither. I couldn't explain it, but I felt trapped. I felt like I was losing my sense of self. I wasn't the strong, independent woman I used to be. I had become someone else. Someone who was too scared to rock the boat, to challenge the man who had once made me feel special. I started to isolate myself even further. When my friends would reach out, I made excuses. I'm really busy with Alex tonight, I'd say. Maybe next week, but next week never came. And each time I chose Alex over my friends, it became harder to reach out again. The gap grew wider. I felt guilty, but I didn't know how to bridge it. I felt like I couldn't go back to the way things were. I had become too invested in Alex, in the relationship, to even think about what I was sacrificing. And that's when I began to realize how much power Alex had over me. It wasn't just about spending time together anymore. It was about making me believe that everyone else was a threat, that no one could love me like he did. He planted those seeds of doubt in my mind, making me believe that the only way to be truly loved was to surrender everything to him. My time, my energy, my life. The more I isolated myself, the more I began to believe it. It wasn't until much later that I began to see the full extent of what was happening. By then, Alex had already woven a web of control around me so carefully, so intricately, that I didn't know where I ended and he began. I thought I knew him, but I didn't. I thought I knew myself, but I didn't. I didn't even trust my own thoughts anymore. That's what gaslighting does. It makes you question everything, including your sense of reality. At first, it was small. Tiny moments where I felt uneasy, but when I spoke up about them, Alex would dismiss me. He would tell me I was overreacting, that I was being too sensitive. One evening, I found a text from another woman on his phone. It wasn't explicit, but the message was clear. She called him babe and talked about missing him. When I confronted him, my heart pounding in my chest, I could see the subtle shift in his demeanor. His eyes narrowed, his voice dropped an octave, and he looked at me like I was the crazy one. "Jess, you're imagining things. You're paranoid," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "She's just a friend. You're the one making this into something it's not. I'm tired of you accusing me of things I didn't do. Maybe you're just insecure." My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But every part of me felt like something was wrong. I'd seen the message. But now, Alex was making me feel like I was the one at fault. He was making me feel crazy. That's what gaslighting does. It makes you doubt your own perception of reality. Slowly over time, I stopped trusting myself. I stopped believing that I had the right to be upset. Every time I tried to stand my ground, he turned it around on me. He twisted my words, my feelings, my concerns into something irrational. He told me I was too emotional, too dramatic, too insecure. And the worst part? I started believing him. There were moments where I felt like I was losing my mind, like I couldn't hold on to my own thoughts, like I couldn't trust my own feelings. I started to second-guess every argument, every conversation, every situation. Was I overreacting? Was I making a mountain out of a molehill? Was I crazy? And when I felt like I couldn't trust myself, it became easier to trust Alex. His calm demeanor, his reassuring words, they made me feel like he was the only one who had control over what was real. The more I depended on him, the more he controlled my reality. He had a way of making me feel like he was the only one who truly understood me. He made me feel like I needed him. And in my confusion, I believed it. One day, I tried to express how I was feeling, how his words and actions were making me doubt myself. I told him I was tired of feeling like I was walking on eggshells, always afraid to speak my mind, always worried I was doing something wrong. I thought he would understand. I thought he would listen. But instead he turned it around on me. "I'm tired of you making me feel like I'm the problem," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "You keep accusing me of things that aren't true, and I'm not going to stand for it anymore." That was his favorite line. I'm not going to stand for it anymore. I couldn't even respond. I couldn't even defend myself because at that moment, I wasn't sure what the truth was. I didn't know if I was right or if I was just too emotional. It felt like I was being torn apart inside. I wanted to fight back, but I didn't know how. He had stripped away my confidence, my sense of self, until I wasn't sure who I was anymore. There were days when I felt completely disconnected from everything around me. I couldn't trust my own thoughts. I couldn't trust my own feelings. I couldn't even trust my instincts. I had become a shell of the person I used to be. and Alex was the only one who seemed to have the answers. In those moments, I would beg myself to snap out of it. I would remind myself of the woman I used to be, the strong, independent woman who wouldn't tolerate this kind of behavior. But it was like a fog had descended over me, and every time I tried to see clearly, it clouded my vision again. The scariest part of it all was that I didn't even know how to escape. I didn't know where to turn or who to trust. I had pushed away my friends, isolated myself from the people who cared about me, and now I was trapped in this toxic, twisted relationship with no way out. I felt like I was suffocating, and yet I couldn't bring myself to leave. I felt like a part of me was dying inside, and for the first time, I truly understood what it felt like to lose yourself. I had been gaslit into believing that I didn't deserve better, that I wasn't capable of being happy without him. He had convinced me that no one would ever love me like he did, and so I stayed, hoping that one day things would get better. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't. I reached a point where the exhaustion started to consume me. I could feel it in every part of my body, my mind, my soul, even my bones. It wasn't physical fatigue. It was deeper than that. It was the kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly questioning everything you do, everything you say, everything you feel. It was the weariness of trying to keep up with the endless cycle of arguments, apologies, confusion, and fear. And it was this constant, gnawing thought that maybe, just maybe, I was the problem. I had spent months trying to make everything work. I tried to be the perfect girlfriend, the one who understood, the one who supported, the one who never questioned, never demanded, never rocked the boat. I tried to silence the voice inside me that told me something was wrong, that there were red flags everywhere, because I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to admit that I was trapped in a relationship that was slowly killing me from the inside out. I kept telling myself that it would get better, that things would change, that Alex would see how much I loved him, and everything would go back to how it used to be. But that's the thing about toxic relationships. They don't get better. They don't magically fix themselves. They don't heal with time. And yet, despite all the evidence, despite the constant manipulation, the isolation, the gaslighting, I stayed. I stayed because I couldn't see a way out. I stayed because, in some twisted part of my mind, I still believed that if I just loved him enough, if I just tried hard enough, things would get better. But they didn't. They only got worse, one night, after another argument that I couldn't even fully remember. Because when you're in an emotionally abusive relationship, it feels like you're constantly fighting the same fight over and over again. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me didn't look like me. She looked like someone who was lost, someone who didn't know where she ended and he began. Her eyes were dull, her face was drawn, and her spirit was gone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, to shake myself awake from the nightmare I had somehow found myself in. But I couldn't, because every time I raised my voice, every time I tried to stand up for myself, Alex would tell me I was overreacting, that I was being dramatic, that I needed to calm down. And each time, I shrank further into myself. I had become a version of myself that I didn't recognize. I wasn't the strong, confident woman I used to be. I wasn't the woman who knew her worth, who had dreams and goals and aspirations. I wasn't the woman who knew that she deserved to be treated with kindness and respect. I had become someone who was constantly walking on eggshells, someone who was afraid to speak her mind for fear of being labeled too much, someone who didn't even trust her own emotions anymore. I had stopped doing the things I loved. I stopped going to yoga classes. I stopped reading the books that once brought me comfort. I stopped hanging out with my friends. I even stopped looking in the mirror because I couldn't face the woman I had become. I thought that by focusing all my energy on Alex, on making him happy, I could fix everything. But nothing ever felt right. Nothing ever felt enough. And yet, even in the midst of that overwhelming exhaustion, I still couldn't bring myself to leave. There were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when I thought about what my life would look like without him. What would it be like to wake up without the constant dread of having to face another fight, another accusation, another manipulation? What would it be like to be free from the mental and emotional shackles I had locked myself into? But those moments were fleeting, because as soon as I allowed myself to think about leaving, the flood of guilt and fear would come rushing in. Where would I go? I'd ask myself. What would I do without him? He's the only one who truly understands me. He's the only one who's always there for me. And that's when the doubt would creep in again. Was I really the one at fault? Was it really that bad? Maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe I was just too sensitive. Maybe I was the one who had changed. Maybe I had ruined everything. Maybe it wasn't really Alex who was the problem. I had been so thoroughly gaslit, so emotionally drained that I couldn't even trust my own mind. I was stuck in a constant cycle of self-doubt, self-blame, and emotional exhaustion. The man I loved had become my captor, and I had become my own worst enemy. And then, one day, I reached a breaking point. I had been going through the motions, trying to keep things together, trying to make everything seem normal. But deep down I knew I was dying inside. I knew I couldn't keep living this way. I had nothing left to give. I was empty. And that's when it hit me. I had to make a choice. I could either continue to stay in this toxic relationship, allowing it to slowly erode every part of me until I was nothing but a hollow shell, or I could finally walk away. The choice wasn't easy. It wasn't simple, but it was clear. I knew that I couldn't stay anymore. It wasn't until that one night that everything seemed to come crashing down. Looking back, I can't even pinpoint what exactly triggered it. It was just another one of those nights where Alex and I had one of our endless arguments about something so trivial, so small, it didn't even matter. But everything that had been building up inside me for months finally reached its boiling point. I don't even remember what the argument was about, but I remember how I felt. Raw, exposed, like I had finally hit a wall I couldn't climb over anymore. My chest was tight, my mind racing in a million different directions. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, and all I wanted was for it to stop. I was so tired, so damn tired of fighting for a relationship that was slowly suffocating me. Alex was standing in front of me, his arms crossed, his usual condescending look on his face. "You're being ridiculous," he said, his voice dripping with that same familiar tone of superiority. "Why do you always blow things out of proportion? You never know when to stop." It was as if everything in me broke at once. The words felt like a slap to my face, and for the first time I didn't just take it. I looked at him, my vision blurred by the mix of anger and tears, and something inside me snapped. I was no longer the woman who had let him twist her mind, who had doubted her own sanity. I was no longer the woman who thought she wasn't worthy of better. "Why do you always make me feel like this?" I finally asked, the words coming out choked, a mix of frustration and pain. "Why do you always make me question myself, make me feel like I'm crazy?" Alex stared at me for a moment, like he was confused by my words. His eyes softened, but it was a manipulative softness, the kind that had tricked me so many times before. "Jess, you're overreacting," he said. "You know I love you, right? I'm just trying to help you." That was his go-to line, always disguised as concern, as love, as someone who was looking out for me. It made me feel like the problem was with me, that I was the one who couldn't see how good he was to me. But in that moment, something in me broke free. I was done with the lies. I was done with the gaslighting. I was done feeling like I was the problem in a relationship where everything revolved around his control. "I'm done," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "I can't do this anymore, Alex. I can't keep living like this. I don't even know who I am anymore. I've lost myself in this. Lost myself in trying to fix you, to make you love me. But I can't do it anymore. I'm not doing this for you anymore. I'm doing it for me." I don't think he understood. His face twisted into something between confusion and anger. "You can't just leave," he spat, his voice rising. "Where would you go? Who would love you if you left me? You're nothing without me, Jess. No one would care about you the way I do." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach, but this time, I didn't back down. It was as if everything I had been through finally clicked into place. His words were nothing but empty threats, designed to make me doubt myself and make me feel worthless. But in that moment, I realized something powerful. I wasn't nothing. I was everything. I was worthy of love, of respect, of kindness. "I'm not afraid of being alone anymore," I said, my voice shaking but steady. "I'm afraid of losing myself to someone who doesn't care about me. I'm afraid of staying in a relationship that's slowly killing me. So I'm walking away. I'm walking away from you, from all of this." And for the first time in so long, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't just walking away from him. I was walking away from the lies, from the gaslighting, from the fear. I was walking away from the version of myself that had been trapped, controlled, and manipulated. Alex stood there for a moment, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger. But I didn't care anymore. I had made my decision. This wasn't love. This wasn't healthy. I wasn't going to be anyone's emotional punching bag. "I'm leaving," I said again, this time with more conviction, "and you can't stop me." It was in that moment that I realized how much I had endured, how much I had allowed myself to believe that I was unworthy of anything better, that this was the best I could get. But no more. The person I had been, The woman who had stayed in that toxic relationship for so long no longer existed. I had to let her go in order to save myself. I packed my things that night, everything I could fit into a few bags, and I left. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. But it wasn't just the physical act of leaving that changed everything. It was the emotional release, the realization that I didn't need to be in that toxic environment to feel loved. That real love wasn't supposed to feel like fear. Real love wasn't supposed to drain you until you were empty, until you couldn't even recognize the person you were anymore. That night, I didn't just leave Alex. I left behind the version of me that had believed I wasn't enough. I left behind the fear, the self-doubt, and the emotional exhaustion. I was taking my life back, piece by piece, and it felt terrifying, but it also felt liberating. The first few days were the hardest. There were moments when I missed him, when the loneliness crept in, and I doubted whether I had made the right choice. But every time I questioned myself, I remembered what I had left behind. I remembered the woman I was becoming, the woman who had reclaimed her voice, her power, and her worth. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. The healing process would take time, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. And that breath felt like freedom. Leaving wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. The emotional weight of breaking free from someone who had been such a huge part of my life for so long was overwhelming. But deep down, I knew it was the only choice I could make for myself. The first few days after I left were a blur. I moved into a small apartment I could barely afford, surrounded by boxes and the remnants of a life I was trying to escape. I kept my phone on silent, trying to block out the constant barrage of text messages and missed calls from Alex. He'd been relentless, telling me I was making a mistake, that I was just angry and needed to cool down. He promised things would change. He said he loved me and begged me to come back. But I couldn't go back. Not after everything. Not after I finally saw the truth about what I had been living in. At night, when the silence of my new apartment enveloped me, I would lie awake, heart racing, mind replaying everything over and over again. I had spent so long in that toxic relationship, convincing myself that it was normal, that it was love. I had become so used to the lies, the gaslighting, the manipulation, that I didn't know who I was without it. I'd stare at the ceiling, haunted by the memories of the woman I had been. The woman who had allowed herself to be controlled, to be belittled, to be made to feel like she wasn't enough. And I cried for the woman I had lost, cried for the years I had wasted believing I was unworthy of anything better. But amidst the tears, there was a flicker of something new, a flicker of hope. For the first time, I wasn't just crying out of despair. I was crying because I was finally free. And with that freedom came an overwhelming sense of fear. I was scared. Scared of being alone. Scared of never being able to trust again. Scared that I had ruined my chance at real love. But I also realized something in that silence. I had been alone for a long time. Even when I was with Alex, I had allowed him to control me, to isolate me, to make me feel like I couldn't survive without him. But I had survived. I was here, breathing, alive, and capable of rebuilding my life piece by piece. I just had to be strong enough to face the fear and take the next step forward. The first step was finding myself again. I started by going back to the things I had once loved. The things that made me feel alive before I had lost myself to a toxic relationship. I went back to reading the books I had put down. The ones that had always made me feel grounded. I reconnected with old friends. Friends who had been there for me before, but whom I had pushed away. The first time I hung out with them, I felt like a stranger. I wasn't the same person I had been when we were close. I had changed, and not in the way I had hoped. But as the night went on, as we laughed and reminisced, I felt something inside me shift. The woman I used to be, the one who loved life and wasn't afraid to be herself, began to re-emerge. It was hard, and it wasn't instant. But every time I took a small step back into the world, every time I allowed myself to feel joy without feeling guilty for it, I felt stronger. I realized that there were parts of me that I had buried, parts of me that I had abandoned in the name of keeping the peace, of avoiding confrontation. But those parts of me were still there. They hadn't been destroyed. They just needed to be rediscovered. Therapy became my anchor. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma and emotional abuse. I would sit in her office, sometimes crying, sometimes silent, but always learning. She taught me how to set boundaries, how to recognize when someone was trying to manipulate me, how to trust my gut. She helped me rebuild the pieces of my self-worth, one session at a time. One of the hardest things I had to confront in therapy was my own guilt. I felt guilty for leaving. I felt guilty for taking care of myself instead of Alex. I felt like I had abandoned him, even though I knew deep down that he was the one who had abandoned me long ago. But my therapist helped me realize that I wasn't responsible for his happiness. I wasn't responsible for fixing him. I was responsible for my own life, my own healing. And as I worked through my therapy, I began to regain my confidence. Slowly, I started trusting myself again. I learned to listen to my instincts, to honor my feelings, and to set boundaries that protected my peace. It was a long journey, one that took time and patience, but each step forward felt like a victory. I also started working on the things that had always brought me joy: my passion for writing, my love for travel, and my desire to make a difference in the world. These were the things that had once defined me, and I was determined to reclaim them. I remember the first time I sat down at my desk and wrote something that wasn't about Alex or the relationship I had just left. It was a simple piece, but it felt like I was finally reconnecting with the woman I had been before. For the first time in so long, I didn't feel weighed down by the past. I felt light, free, and hopeful. Of course, the healing process wasn't linear. Some days, I still felt the echoes of that toxic relationship, the memories of the lies and the manipulation that had haunted me. But I wasn't defined by them. I wasn't defined by the scars he had left on me. I was defined by my resilience, by my ability to get back up and keep moving forward, even when it felt impossible. And slowly, I started to see the world differently. I began to realize that there was so much more to life than the narrow, suffocating existence I had lived with Alex. There were friendships, passions, and experiences waiting for me, and I didn't have to live in fear anymore. I didn't have to dim my light to make someone else feel comfortable. I was allowed to shine. I was allowed to take up space, and that realization changed everything. The first few weeks of being free from Alex were like trying to breathe after being submerged underwater for years. There was a sharp relief, but also a deep, unsettling discomfort. I could finally hear myself think, but those thoughts weren't always comforting. The silence was overwhelming. For so long, I had been used to the noise of the chaos, the tension, and the constant emotional manipulation. Now, without it, I felt unmoored, like I had to relearn how to exist on my own. It was a strange feeling, waking up every morning and not having to brace myself for the emotional roller coaster that had been my life with Alex. There were no more fights waiting to erupt out of nowhere. No more sudden silences or accusations that would make my heart race in fear. It was just me, and that terrified me. I didn't know who I was without the constant validation, the constant reassurance that I was enough, even if the enough was always shifting, always conditional. I had spent so long relying on Alex's approval that when it was gone, I felt like a stranger to myself. I didn't know where to start, where to even begin this process of rebuilding. But I did know one thing. I couldn't stay stuck in the place of grief. I couldn't let the pain of the past control me anymore. I had to keep moving forward. The healing process wasn't easy. It wasn't like I woke up one day and felt completely fine. There were days when I felt broken, when the weight of everything I had been through hit me like a tidal wave. There were moments when I wanted to crawl back into the shell I had created with Alex, where things were predictable, even if they were unhealthy. But I knew deep down that I could never go back to that life. I had seen the truth, and that truth was that I was worthy of more. I was worthy of a love that didn't come with manipulation. A love that didn't require me to lose myself in order to feel valued. I started small. I called my friends back. I let them in, even though it felt uncomfortable. For so long, I had pushed them away, convincing myself that Alex was all I needed. But now, with him gone, I had to face the consequences of isolating myself for so long. The awkwardness was palpable at first. I didn't know how to reconnect, how to explain where I had been or why I had vanished from their lives. But as we talked, as they listened and supported me, I felt something begin to heal inside me. It was the warmth of their understanding, their unconditional love, that reminded me of who I truly was. I wasn't just someone who existed in a relationship. I was someone who had a life, a personality, a purpose beyond the toxic bonds I had created. I started to rediscover the things that made me feel alive. I went back to writing, something I had once loved but had abandoned in the blur of my relationship with Alex. I poured my heart onto the page, allowing myself to express everything I had kept inside for so long. The words didn't come easily at first, but over time I began to feel like myself again. Writing became my outlet, my therapy. It was where I could finally speak the truth about what had happened to me without fear of being judged or manipulated. I also began to focus on my physical well-being. For months, I had neglected my health. I hadn't cared for my body the way I should have because I had been too consumed by the emotional turmoil of my relationship. Now, I started going for walks, doing yoga, eating healthier. The physical exercise wasn't just about fitness. It was about reclaiming my power, my control over my own life. It was about reminding myself that I was in charge of my own body, my own health, and my own happiness. Therapy was another crucial part of my healing journey. Every week I went to my therapist, sitting in that safe space where I could unpack all the emotions I had bottled up for so long. I talked about the manipulation, the lies, the gaslighting. I talked about the guilt I carried for staying as long as I did, for allowing myself to be treated that way. My therapist helped me see that I wasn't weak for staying. I was human. I was someone who had been manipulated, someone who had been emotionally abused, and it wasn't my fault. She helped me identify the patterns of behavior that had kept me in that toxic relationship and gave me the tools to prevent them from ever happening again. Through therapy, I started to rebuild my self-esteem, piece by piece. I had spent so long believing that I wasn't enough, that I was unworthy of love unless I conformed to someone else's expectations. But with every session, I began to remember who I was before Alex. I remembered my passions, my values, my dreams. And with that remembrance came a deep sense of self-respect, a respect that I had never truly given myself before. It wasn't just about healing from the relationship. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity. It was about learning to trust myself again, to believe that I was capable of making my own decisions, of living my own life on my own terms. There were times when the road to healing felt long and painful. I had moments of doubt, moments where I questioned whether I would ever truly feel whole again, but I kept pushing forward. I kept reminding myself that healing was not a destination, but a journey that I had to take one step at a time. In the process, I learned the power of self-love. I learned that love is not about sacrificing yourself for someone else, about losing yourself to make someone else happy. True love starts with yourself. It starts with honoring your worth, your needs, and your boundaries. And once I understood that, I knew that I would never allow myself to be treated that way again. I had escaped the prison of that toxic relationship, but more importantly, I had escaped the prison of my own self-doubt. I had begun to trust myself again, and that was the most liberating feeling in the world. As the months went on, I began to understand something crucial about my healing process. It wasn't just about moving on from Alex. It was about learning to truly understand what had happened, why I had stayed so long, and what I could do to ensure I never found myself in that position again. It was about reflection, taking a step back and facing the reality of what I had experienced, acknowledging my own role in it, and forgiving myself for the parts of me that had allowed the abuse to happen. I remember sitting in my living room one quiet evening, reflecting on the time I spent with Alex. I didn't hate him. I didn't even feel angry anymore. Instead, there was a deep sadness. Sadness for the woman I had been, for the way I had allowed myself to be manipulated, for how easily I had believed that the toxic relationship we shared was love. I was sad for the version of myself that had convinced herself that this was the best she deserved, and I was heartbroken for the woman who had sacrificed so much of her happiness, her identity, and her peace just to keep someone else from leaving. But as I sat there, with the weight of those realizations sinking in, I also felt something else, an immense sense of relief. The sadness wasn't just about regret. It was about closure. It was about understanding that everything I had been through was a part of my journey, a journey that had led me to this moment of clarity. I had learned lessons I would carry with me for the rest of my life. I had spent so much of my life trying to understand what love was. I had convinced myself that love was supposed to be difficult, that it was supposed to require sacrifice, compromise, and sometimes even pain. I believed that love meant putting someone else's needs above my own, constantly giving, constantly pleasing, constantly enduring. But now, I saw the truth. That wasn't love. Love isn't about losing yourself. It isn't about tolerating things that make you feel small, insignificant, or unworthy. True love is built on respect, trust, and mutual understanding. Love should never feel like a test of your strength. It should be something that nourishes you, that helps you grow, that brings joy and peace into your life. One of the hardest things I had to admit to myself was that I had been complicit in the abuse in a way. Not because I wanted to be, not because I enjoyed the pain or the manipulation, but because I had allowed it to happen. I had allowed myself to stay in that relationship, even when I knew something was wrong. I had allowed myself to doubt my worth, to question my own instincts, and to silence the voice inside me that screamed, "This isn't right." But now, with the benefit of time and reflection, I could see it clearly. I had been a victim of emotional abuse. And that wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault that Alex had chosen to manipulate, control, and gaslight me. It wasn't my fault that I had stayed because I didn't know any better. I had been vulnerable. I had been lost. But I was no longer that person. This was the part of the healing process that truly shifted my perspective. The realization that I had the power to change my future. I had the power to decide what kind of love I would allow in my life. I had the power to decide what I deserved and how I would be treated. It wasn't easy to let go of the guilt I carried. For months, I questioned whether I should have left sooner, whether I had been too weak, whether I had allowed myself to become someone I didn't recognize. But I had to let that guilt go. I had to learn to forgive myself, because beating myself up for the past wouldn't change anything. The only thing that mattered was what I did moving forward. I also spent a lot of time thinking about how Alex had manipulated me. I didn't want to give him power over me anymore, but I needed to understand how it had happened. How he had been able to chip away at my sense of self-worth. How he had twisted every moment of love into something toxic. I realized that emotional abuse is often subtle. It isn't always screaming and shouting, threats, or physical harm. Emotional abuse can happen in quiet moments, in the way someone makes you doubt your own reality, in the way they twist your words, in the way they make you believe that you're too much or not enough. It can be in the way they take your power away, piece by piece, until you're too exhausted to fight back. But now, I knew the signs. I could see the red flags that I had missed before. I could recognize when someone was trying to manipulate me, when someone was trying to control me, and I promised myself that I would never allow anyone to make me feel the way Alex had made me feel. In this journey of reflection, I also began to understand something important about love, real love, healthy love. It's not about perfection. It's not about finding someone who completes you or makes you feel whole. Real love is about partnership. About two people coming together with respect and honesty. It's about being able to grow individually while supporting each other, not losing yourself in the process. Real love is never about fear. It's never about walking on eggshells or constantly questioning your worth. Real love is about finding someone who sees you, who values you, and who cherishes you, not because of what you do for them, but because of who you are. As I reflected on everything I had learned, I realized that the most important lesson I had gained from all of this was about self-respect. I had learned to set boundaries. I had learned to listen to my gut, to trust my instincts, and to honor my feelings. I had learned to love myself, even when it was hard, and even when I didn't feel worthy. And I knew, deep down, that no matter what happened from here on out, I would never settle for less than I deserved. I would never let anyone treat me the way Alex had treated me. I had found my voice again, and I would never allow it to be silenced. The more I reflected on everything I had been through, the more I realized how much power I had reclaimed by simply choosing to walk away. Healing wasn't something that happened overnight. It wasn't about erasing the pain or pretending the past never happened. Healing was about taking ownership of my story, about saying, "This happened, but it doesn't define me. I am stronger than what I've been through." I learned that you don't have to wait for the perfect moment to start healing. You don't have to wait for the scars to fade before you begin living again. Healing starts when you decide you deserve more. When you decide that no matter how broken you may feel, you are worthy of a life full of peace, love, and happiness. For so long, I allowed myself to be convinced that I couldn't have those things, that love was meant to hurt, that relationships were supposed to be a struggle, that if someone truly loved me, they would make me feel small, belittled, or ignored. But I know now that's not love. That's control, manipulation, and abuse. In the past, I used to fear that I wouldn't find someone who could love me as deeply as Alex had promised. I feared being alone, feared that no one would ever understand me the way he claimed he did. I feared that I would never feel that kind of connection again. But now I see that real love, the kind of love I deserve, isn't supposed to make me feel afraid. It's supposed to lift me up, to make me feel valued, to make me feel seen and heard. The most important thing I've learned in this journey is that the person I was always meant to find, the person I was always meant to be loved by, was myself. Self-love became the foundation of my healing. I learned to appreciate my own worth, to respect my boundaries, and to give myself the kindness and compassion I had once reserved only for others. There were days when I still questioned my strength, I wondered if I was strong enough to keep moving forward, if I was brave enough to keep choosing myself. But every time I asked myself those questions, I reminded myself of what I had already done. I had walked away from a relationship that was breaking me. I had faced my deepest fears. And I had survived. More than that, I had thrived. I wasn't just getting by anymore. I was rediscovering myself piece by piece, and creating a life that was mine and mine alone. And this journey of healing, of self-discovery, has taught me something profound. We are all worthy of love that makes us feel safe, respected, and valued. Love should never feel like a punishment. It should never feel like a test of your endurance, your patience, or your self-worth. If you're reading this, and you've ever felt trapped in a relationship that made you question your worth, you're not alone. If you've ever felt manipulated, controlled, or gaslit, I see you. I understand you. I know the pain you're feeling, and I know the fear that holds you back from leaving. But I'm here to tell you that you don't have to stay. You have the strength to leave, to reclaim your life, and to rebuild yourself from the inside out. You are not broken. You are not damaged. You are not defined by the person who tried to tear you down. You are worthy of everything you've ever dreamed of and more. You deserve love that doesn't come with conditions. You deserve a relationship that lifts you up, that makes you feel whole. If you're still in a relationship where you feel small, where you feel like you have to hide parts of yourself just to keep the peace, I urge you to listen to that voice inside you, that voice that tells you you deserve more. It might be hard to hear it at first, especially when you've been told for so long that you don't deserve better. But that voice is there, and it's telling you the truth. You are worthy of more. Leaving may seem impossible. It may seem like you're too deep in it, like you'll never find your way out. But I'm here to tell you that there is a life beyond the lies. There is a life beyond the manipulation. There is a life where you can breathe freely, where you can be yourself without fear or guilt. It's waiting for you, just on the other side of the decision to leave. I know it's terrifying. I know that doubt will creep in, that fear will try to hold you back. But you are stronger than you think. You are more powerful than you realize. And every step you take toward healing is a victory. So, if you're still in that relationship, if you're still questioning whether you should stay or go, I want you to ask yourself, is this love or is this fear? Real love doesn't make you afraid. Real love doesn't make you feel less than. Real love doesn't make you question your worth every single day. And if the love you're in doesn't make you feel safe, it's not love. It's control. It's manipulation. And you deserve better. You deserve the freedom to live your life authentically, without the weight of someone else's lies or expectations dragging you down. I know the road to healing is long, and I know there will be moments when it feels like it's never going to get better. But I promise you this, it will. Every day you choose yourself, every day you take a step forward, you're closer to the life you deserve. You're closer to the woman you were always meant to be. So, if you've been through this, if you're currently going through this, or if you simply need to hear that you are not alone, please share your story in the comments. Let's break the silence together. Let's stand together. Because we are stronger when we share our experiences, our strength, and our healing. If you've ever loved someone who made you question your worth, I want you to know that you are worthy. You are strong. You are enough, and you don't have to do this alone.